Have you ever encountered intelligence people like the CIA or the FBI? Well, that's only happened to me one time in my life, and it happened at the House of Judah. This was an unexpected moment in our experience there, but it was indeed a divine encounter. So, when you least expect it, God may bring someone into your path, whether they're central intelligence or they are an angel unaware. Don't be surprised because in the kingdom, divine appointments happen all the time. A visit from the Mossad. Now, the Mossad, let me explain, and some of you may not be aware, the Mossad is the Israeli version of the CIA. It's their intelligence agency that does covert and reconnaissance and that kind of thing. It was a busy Saturday at the House of Judah, and although some committed Seventh-day Adventists and law-loving Messianics voiced their objections to the House of Judah staying open on the traditional Sabbath, these were our best sales days. And our belief was that under the Brit Hadashah, the new covenant, we are free to observe the day that he appoints for us. And we took that from Romans 14:6. People were shopping the neighborhood establishment, conducting their Saturday grocery runs, and they weren't bound to their 9-to-5 jobs. And so they would stop in and say hello, or they would look and see what's new. And this was the best day for our little establishment to be open for business. And though the economy was doing well for the most part, the retail book sale market struggled, unless you were part of a master chain store. The House of Judah would always have to work harder, smarter, and survive by the grace of God. Our store was situated next to Checker Auto Parts on one side and Walgreens Drug Store on the other. So traffic often came from curious passers-by who were intrigued by the store name or the flyers in the window, some of which were in Hebrew. Once inside, shoppers were dazzled by the messianic ambience. The House of Judah was a most unusual fare for the Far East Valley of Phoenix, where the population was primarily what we call snowbirds. These are retirees who spend their winters in Phoenix. I always loved our connection to a particular passage in the book of Acts. Since the harbor was unsuitable to winter in, the majority decided that we should sail on, hoping to reach Phoenix and winter there. Isn't that marvelous? That's Acts 27:12. Even before we opened the doors for business that particular morning, an older red van was parked directly in front of the store, leaking oil and in much need of some tender loving care. We were frustrated that the customers of Checker Auto, often parked in front of the House of Judah, purchased their car parts and then began to fix their vehicles in front of the store. All this despite the signs posted that these were designated House of Judah parking spaces. Suddenly, I observed a very tall, rugged, and good-looking man emerge from the auto parts store and begin working on the red van. There was something compelling about this stranger. My son Chris was manning the front counter as usual, while multitasking 100 different jobs that required a staff of 50 to adequately fulfill. He kept one eye on his duties and the other on the peculiar scene just outside the front door. Our Saturday mechanic, as I called him, had practically dismantled the chassis of his van, and he was covered from head to toe in oil and grease. Around 2 o'clock in the afternoon, this tall stranger emerged from the undercarriage of his vehicle and walked boldly through the doors straight into the House of Judah. He stood still, just looking around in amazement. His eyes wandered to and fro, taking in the wonder of it all. On the right side of the store, we provided our customers a myriad of traditional Christian media, books, Bibles, and study tools. On the left side, we proudly displayed the very essence of Israel. There were the shofarims, those are the ram's horn trumpets. The talits with the tzitzis, those were prayer shawls with the fringes on the end. The menorahs, the Havdalah sets with the spice box and the kiddushin cup, and everything you needed for the close of Sabbath. There were rows of Torah references, Tanakhs, Ketuvim, the books of Moses, the Hebrew Old Testament, the writings, and the prophets. The beloved sounds of music permeated the store. Our psalmist was Marty Getz, and he has become a good friend over the years. We also played Paul Wilbur and Jonathan Sattel from time to time, and they brought the essence of worship into the store. And in the center of the store, draped from the ceiling, was a full-size flag of the state of Israel. It was a sight for any visitor to stop and behold. The stranger stood tall, at least 6.5 feet. He strode through the aisles, taking in all that his heart could hold. He smiled in almost childlike fashion. When he turned my direction, I saw a large moggan, a Star of David, around his neck on a bold chain. He was a Jew. Over the next hour or so, he engaged in conversation with Chris, inquiring about the house of Judah. Why would we mix Jewish and Gentile Christian artifacts, books, music, all in one store? He asked, is there a Jewish community out here in the wilderness? The man was full of questions. When Joe arrived later that day at the store, he introduced himself, and the two talked of the problems of the van mostly. Joe was a master mechanic. He offered his expertise to help, a much appreciated gift, I'm sure. The man's name was Michael. He told us he was a member of Mossad, the Israeli intelligence, as I said, and was on leave from an assignment with the Drug Enforcement Agency. Michael shared that he had been doing undercover work in Mexico, infiltrating the drug cartels. While on assignment there, he met and fell in love with a Mexican maiden who was a Christian. That was about 5 years ago, and God blessed their union with 2 beautiful boys. Her name was Maria. And about a year ago, Michael's cover was blown with his work with Mossad. So he and his family were relocated to a small town in New Mexico in the Witness Protection Program. But soon after their relocation, Michael's wife Maria developed breast cancer. It was devastating news for both of them. Maria's father was a highly respected physician in Mexico City, and she desperately wanted to be treated by him rather than the conventional American doctors. So with great trepidation, Michael arranged for Maria and the 2 children to depart for her homeland. She assured Michael that God would protect her. Again, she was a strong believer, but Michael was still in doubt. He feared for her safety and knew that it was certain death for him to return. The cartels had placed a hefty price on his head. And so Maria and the children departed while Michael stayed behind and very much alone. When he could no longer bear the separation, Michael closed up the house in New Mexico and headed for the southern border. As God's plan unfolded, however, he had to cross Arizona on his way to Mexico, and then his van developed mechanical problems. He nursed the vehicle along until it would no longer run. He was able to coax the van into the shopping center parking lot and ride up to the house of Judah. There, he planned to go into Checker Auto Parts, he parked the van, and then it died completely. The Lord's intervention was even at the door. the door to the house of Judah. In the same way, when you see all these things happen, you know that the Son of Man is near, even at the door. From the Gospel of Matthew. We prayed with him for Maria and the children and for Michael's safety that afternoon. Joe invited him to our evening Havdalah service. We were closing the Sabbath out, as we did every Saturday. We had invited a guest speaker, an archaeologist who had recently returned from Israel. There are no coincidences in the kingdom. She was a member of a team who were the very first to translate the Isaiah scroll from the Dead Sea Scrolls at Qumran. Michael agreed to come if he had not yet fixed the van by sundown. He was, of course, eager to get on his way. But so it was to be another appointed time. We were treated to a breathtaking presentation that night of the evidence from the scrolls, the ancient writings, the archaeology, and of course the English translation. With all of the picture slides presented in the Q&A period following, the Kehalat members were enthralled and they stayed until 2 o'clock in the morning. Michael stayed too. In fact, he stood right under the Israeli flag for the entire evening. There seemed to be a peace that embraced his boyish smile now. The mystery of Isaiah had captivated his soul. It was then that Joe turned to him and asked the most important question he would ever encounter. Are you ready to receive Yeshua as your Messiah? A broad smile broke across Michael's face, and wiping away tears held back for too long, this seasoned veteran of the Mossad broke through generations of orthodoxy and skepticism to do the unthinkable. He tore down the walls of separation, and the blinders were off. Yeshua was his. For Christ himself has brought us peace by making Jews and Gentiles one new man. With his own body, he broke down the wall that separated them and kept them enemies. That's part of being the body of Messiah. We are one in him. Just as the sun was about to rise on that Sunday morning, we shared a meal together with Michael and rejoiced in the miracle of his salvation. We agreed to meet back at the house of Judah after some much-needed sleep. Joe offered his mechanical expertise to finish the repairs. And despite the offer of a comfortable bed in our home, Michael chose to sleep in his van. After a couple of hours, we drove back to the house of Judah to see if our kingdom family's newest member was awake yet. But as we pulled into the parking lot, it was apparent that the red van was gone. Michael must have been successful in completing the repairs and headed south to the border in his beloved Maria. We often wondered whether Michael was a figment of our imagination. Was he an angel unawares? Or if he was a man on assignment whom God directed our way, that he might hear the good news of the kingdom and his Messiah, Yeshua. In any event, we never heard from Michael again. But we will see him face to face one day at the wedding of our bridegroom in the kingdom. Divine appointments. So I encourage you to continue to seek the kingdom first and his righteousness, the scepter of his authority, and all these things will be added unto you too. And so till next time, shalom.